this is my overview. First of all, I'm going to tell you what big data is at all, and then I will provide you with two examples to illustrate to you how we can think differently, how we can think data differently, that is. Subsequently, I will show to you how data can be used in order to improve data. Mr. Herberg alluded to that already. And then before wrapping up, I will outline a vision on big data in nature conservation and in the context of WTG. So first of all, what is big data? I've realized that for many people, this is something like a black box or a very abstract notion, at least. It's a little bit vague as a term, and I hope that I can clarify a couple of things here. So big always suggests that it is a lot, it is large, and a multitude of data are stored on big servers. Large and a lot is true, but this is not the only property. I've resorted to a very hands-on definition of big data that is based on the 5 V's. First of all, we have volume. So the volume, the quantity of data is one of the V's, but 4 are missing. Those are variety, heterogeneity of data, velocity, the speed at which additional data can be generated, veracity, uncertainty in data, that is, and value. So this is value, added value that can be generated from the data. Of course, this is not very specific. It's still at a very abstract level, but subsequently I will also give you a very concrete example for you to fill this with life. But let's not forget that in the context of big data, there are also specialized tools at hand, i.e. software and hardware. This goes for data acquisition, data management, analysis, etc. So buzzwords here are machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence, etc. So the 5 V's. So let's suppose for your own interest, or because you're interested in it, you have been observing a local population of buttercup. And I read in the documents of the Federal Institution for Wildlife Conservation that this is maybe a winner of climate change because they can adapt to rising temperatures. But now I realize that the population I've been observing for years has been declining for years. And I'd like to know whether that's due to what has happened around my place because temperatures have dropped or risen, or whether it might be down to other factors. So I am opting for a big data approach, collecting loads of data on temperature, for instance. So that's the first V, heterogeneity, variety. So whether data, satellite data can be resorted to, regional data. I'd also consult social media because there are people who publish information such as, well, today it is nice and warm. Now, then we have velocity, speed, whether sites record temperature every 10 minutes, and they use analysis data, satellite data that you can download in an hourly resolution. And whenever you consult social media, today we find more than 6,000 tweets per second that are published there. And very rapidly, at a very high pace, data is generated there, which automatically leads to a situation where we have huge volumes of data. Then let me mention veracity, uncertainty in weather stations. Of course, we've got technologies that allow us to have a level of certainty of plus minus 0.5 Kelvin, which is quite true, quite correct. But it's more difficult when you consult social media. So whenever somebody posts that it is nice and warm, around where he or she lives. Does that mean that it's warm inside or outside? Or whenever somebody writes, well, today it is warmer than yesterday, at last I can go outside again. What does that mean, actually? So this needs to be verified. And the last of the 5 V's is value creation, generating added value. And when collecting all the data, I hopefully will find some information on whether my species reacts to the weather or not. So this way you can generate knowledge to contribute to protecting the species. Possibly I will find out that it's got nothing to do with temperature, but rather with agricultural use. That's one possible outcome. So this was just to illustrate what big data is, and I would like to provide you with 2 examples to fill these ideas with life, thinking data in different contexts, rethinking data. First of all, you can use data going beyond their purpose, and here I'd like to point out the Icarus antenna installed on the International Space Station ISS. This is a project initiated by the Max Planck Society, and I think you might have read about it in the media. So astronauts put an antenna on the ISS, which is now circling around the Earth, receiving data. And what is the data received there? The data is sent out by those small transmitters. I can show it to you with the help of my mouse. So these transmitters are very small. They weigh 5 grams and can be put on, attached to very tiny animals. And the data can be used to monitor flight pathways, flyways of birds across Europe or Northern Africa to understand them better. And you can also find out more about thermal flights and thermal air movements, which birds use to be able to fly over longer distances. So you might wonder what I mean by thinking data differently, because it all sounds very traditional, and that's quite right. But I've been told that when you can locate those thermal wind systems, that this is not an easy thing to do with traditional methods. But what is important, when you want to make precise weather forecasts, to resort to those technologies. So it can be an idea to make use of the data sent out by those birds to actually make weather forecasts for Germany more accurate. Second example refers to data acquisition. So the generation of data for nature conservation can be thought differently as well. I've summarized this under the buzzword of homemade street view. Here in this particular example, let's take the plant, the neophyte, which is a narrow-leaved ragwort, which exists a lot in Switzerland, spreading out a lot along motorways in Switzerland in particular. So we have to find out where this plant grows in order to fight against it. So several hundreds of kilometers of our motorway network were monitored with help of a camera. So that's around about half of our motorway network. So across the season, 3 trips were necessary to monitor the spread of this plant, and a particular software was resorted to, deep learning network, a classification software. So the tile view was then made available to experts, who then had to, first of all, identify the plant. They then used that information to train the models, which then reliably forecast whether the plant was to be found there or not. And based on these images, a detailed map of the relevant motorways could be produced. And this is again now an aspect illustrating value creation. That data can be used in a targeted way to contain the spread of this plant. My third point here in this presentation is to make good use of data in order to improve data. This example now is InfoFlora. InfoFlora is the Swiss data center collecting all the data on Swiss plants and flora. They have their own image database and launched their own app as well that you can use to take photographs that are then geolocated and to be transmitted to InfoFlora. So over the past couple of years, InfoFlora has established a huge database of several hundreds of thousands of pictures, classifying them with the help of algorithms, looking into several species to be identified. And this is something that works quite well. And of course, there are also examples where it works less well. When there are plants that have the same morphology, the algorithm is no longer able to detect and identify the species precisely. So InfoFlora teamed up with ETH, the Swiss Technical University of Zurich, to improve the approach. So whenever we've got species with the same morphology, and you can see here on the right-hand side that you need a great degree or high degree of detail in order to really differentiate those and distinguish those two plants. And to do so, you can use additional data on the location of that particular plant. So when you are aware of where a plant grows, then you can also identify it in a better way. And you can also resort to meteorological weather data and other data. And the project is based on two scenarios. First of all, you can just walk around in nature, take a picture of a plant, saying that it's Adonis vanalis. You transmit the data to InfoFlora, which classifies the picture, establishes a list of potential species, evaluates the data, and can provide me with some feedback later on whether it's correct or not in order to validate my hypothesis. Or it might well be that my initial idea is then rejected. And first of all, or second scenario, you can take a picture asking InfoFlora what the particular plant actually is. And ideally, in an ideal scenario, you would receive some hints as to what to look at to make your identification, or you would get the name straight away. And this helps us to come full circle to close that data loop. How can we then create value? Well, this helps us to fill biodiversity databases, which are important for all sorts of different nature conservation purposes. So it helps us to enhance the database. And we've also found that when users receive feedback from their app, that they are willing to deliver even more data, thus enhancing quality and quantity of that database. So to wrap this up, what is our vision for wind parks and wind turbines? Many of the things that I'll be mentioning were pointed out just before by Mr. Herberg in the previous presentation. There are systems such as radar systems, optical systems, detecting species to be protected, and we will listen to more papers on that later on. So the operator of the WTG can then evaluate the data, use systems to maybe ultimately switch off and shut down the wind turbine. And of course, there is other data that you can resort to, provided by weather radars, social media, other platforms that may exist online, where our fellow citizen scientists, as we call them, generate precious data. And there also may be possible automatic call detection systems, or birds equipped with sensors that can provide us with information. So the idea behind this is that you use the system, you extend the system a little bit more to make it usable as well for our purpose. And when you extend it even further, then I would be pointing out that we should not just focus on one wind park only, but on several wind parks. So whenever you are aware of a bird species flying over one wind park might be useful and helpful as well for another wind park. This helps to push for basic research, and also this could be something for private operators, the private sector and local authorities when it comes to devising and planning new wind parks, choosing sites.